The phenomenon of spirit possession is more common and widespread than many people realize. Under certain types of circumstances, it can happen to a person of any age or religious orientation, including one who is non-religious. Spirit possession can also take hold of an entire group of people. Most noticeably, it takes place when a person has either consciously or unconsciously given rein to lower forces and intelligences who may then play a significant role in that person's daily affairs and relationships with others, wreaking havoc wherever they go. Christian theology refers to monitoring spirits or watchers as demonic beings who closely monitor and observe human behavior, waiting to exploit the weaknesses of an individual or collective. Through a human being whose energy field has been sufficiently compromised, entities may attach themselves and operate through them, bringing chaos and ruin to the lives of that person's loved ones and ultimately leading them to their own self-demise. The problem of spiritual oppression in this world is a deeply complex one, and right now I'm only going to be going over some of its common manifestations. To quote from my book, Psychic Self-Defense and the Zodiac, people can become possessed by spirits, but not necessarily in the ways that are commonly imagined, with red eyes, projectile vomit, and walking backward on all four limbs. One of the most common forms of spiritual possession is actually by discarnates, who latch on to a person who is vulnerable due to some type of weakening factor, such as excess drug and alcohol consumption. It is common for people to experience mild or brief states of possession at bars, where people regularly leave themselves open to one or several spirits who hop from head to head for the fuel that is gained from the human vessel. The psychologist Dr. Edith Fiore wrote about this occurrence in her book called The Unquiet Dead. In it, she described her clinical experiences helping to relieve many people from their discomforts and addictions with her own technique for removing earthbound spirits. End of quote. I have personally noticed many different types of spiritual possession in my life, from those that were fleeting to those that were long and drawn out. In relation to spirit possession, there is another equally troubling phenomenon that exists, known as psychic imposition, which is really just another name for psychic attack. This type of attack may be directed by entities that lack physical form, sorcerers, or ordinary people walking the earth. Imposition can turn into superimposition, which basically not only denotes psychic antagonism, but spiritual oppression. Such superimpositions can entail psychic bondage and menacing that affect a person's health, livelihood, and relationships. A person who falls victim to such psychic imposition can become extremely ill or suicidal. They can experience what appear to be long and extensive strings of so-called bad luck. When everything seems to be going against their best efforts, the structures in their life collapsing like a set of dominoes until they have completely run out of fuel and they give up, feeling tired, tied down, broken, and spiritually defeated. There are different stages of possession and spiritual oppression of this magnitude, and if it is caught early enough, its progression can be prevented. Again, quoting from Psychic Self-Defense and the Zodiac, the first stage of any type of possession is the introduction to the spirit. This can occur under a wide range of circumstances, such as at a public event, out in pristine nature, in an old building, or through the invocation of entities and magical spells. The person may or may not be aware of what they have come into contact with at the time. The greatest danger lies in ignorance, when one is unaware of what they have either drawn into their space or come into contact with through no fault of their own. The second stage of possession is that of a combination of emotional and bodily changes that begin to take place once an entity finds their way into a person's psychic space. One telltale sign that a person has become possessed is that they no longer act like themselves, but more and more like a person that others do not recognize. The change is typically not a good one and tends to be very unusual. There may be changes in the person's usual tone of voice and in their daily habits. They may become extremely depressed, sick, or given to unhealthy patterns of addiction. Their life force energy has become heavily oppressed, and there is less of the person's soul and animation, and more of the entity who is possessing them taking hold. It is at this point that a person may become more aware of the true nature of their situation and are forced to make a choice of either surrendering or reaching out for help. A person who is spiritually strong can shake off an entity more readily than one who is either weak or lacks experience in this regard. The third stage of possession is the final and the hardest one to remove from oneself or another person because it has gone to the level of consumption and complete absorption, meaning that one has merged with the entity who has seized control of every aspect of their life. It is an important thing to recognize in such a situation that in most of these cases, the person has given up their will to the entity for some reason that might not be apparent on the surface. This sort of thing does not just happen to anyone. It does happen very frequently to addicts. It may be hard to comprehend why a person would give up their physical body for another entity to control, but the underlying reason is often that they have committed spiritual suicide. Some of them can be saved, but many of them cannot. They stir much chaos wherever they go and cause much harm to others unconsciously. Deep down inside, they do not enjoy this. They gave up their will, which enables them to distance themselves from their emotions and actions most of the time. Some people are psychopathic, and there is something seriously imbalanced within their brain chemistry. They may or may not be possessed by entities. It is widely believed that the most effective treatment for demonic possession is an exorcism by a Catholic priest. This may work for some, but others may find an exorcism by a person of their own lineage and its religious pantheon are more effective. Much of this depends on the person as well as who or what they are being possessed by. End of quote. Here I'd like to point out that religion, including that of Catholicism and Christianity, can sometimes even be the breeding ground for demonic attack and spiritual possession. Let me explain. When a person's intentions are good, honest, and pure, they are naturally protected from many types of psychic attack. When they wear the costume of piety, but inside harbor feelings of jealousy, lust, greed, and revenge, they are essentially practicing the inversion of their so-called faith. One could say that the Christian, Muslim, or Judaist, under false pretenses, is actually a Satanist, although due to their self-delusions of spiritual grandeur, they would in most cases never admit to this. Because of the religiosity involved, their harmful actions become supercharged, often more so than the negative emotions and actions of a non-religious person. In simple terms, they make themselves open to possession or influence by demonic forces due to their narcissism and usage of pretexts. Like the Catholic priest who molests children, they abuse others under the guise of holiness, camouflaging their sins behind a spiritual facade. Malignant archons work their way through the tongues and hands of their hosts to manipulate, confuse, and bind others, and by sowing discord, which becomes a source of food for them. To quote one more passage from my book on psychic self-defense, issues with entities are not terribly different from issues with people in the third-dimensional world that we inhabit. They are just more unnerving because the spirits are difficult for most of us to see, and they gain increased leverage when they sense either our fear or our submission. End of quote. Around this, I have listed several methods for psychic self-defense against both spiritual possession and attack. Each of these suggestions revolve around taking charge of our space. We do this by taking care of ourselves, rather than leaving our bodies and psyches open to negative influences. We eat mindfully, we exercise, we engage in positive habits, we clean up after ourselves, and we reject temptations that steer us off our rightful path in life. The more consciously we inhabit our own space in body, mind, and spirit, the less possible it is for negative entities to affect us. That is because we are occupying our own body consciously. I know that many people will disagree with what I'm about to say, but I will voice my opinion anyway. There is a danger when ingesting any type of mind-altering substance that one opens oneself up to mischievous entities who will toy with their fears and desires and even superimpose themselves into their psychic space, in some cases creating a false sense of enlightenment. The only way to avoid this is by becoming more conscious in advance before even using any of these substances, because no matter how positive and promising they may seem to be, they only become useful to a person who is truly ready for what they will reveal. It doesn't matter how many healing properties an herbal substance has, it will not do the work of helping a person to evolve or escape spiritual entrapment unless they have already taken steps to do so in their ordinary waking life. In some cases, it can make them devolve, going backward instead of forward, because they fall under the delusion and manipulation by entities who see them as fair game in the altered astral states. That being said, I am in support of using certain psychoactive substances under specific circumstances, with the correct mindset and responsibility taken for the results. In other words, there are no shortcuts to spiritual development. Furthermore, no matter what point of the journey we are in life, in order to shield ourselves from demonic and psychic attack, we must fully inhabit our body vessel and our own mental processes as much as possible with awareness and respect. We can light candles, burn incense, ring bells, and still suffer from negative influences if our actions are either counterintuitive or cruel. As I've also stated in my book, there is nothing that can be a substitute for a personal sense of integrity to bring to life what it is that one is praying, visualizing, or reciting mantras for. In an archetypal sense, we may strengthen our spiritual armor by tuning into our own Jupiter energy. Something inside of us always knows when we are on track, and that will guide us from situations of darkness and misery into the light of victory and joy.